Welcome to the second part of building a raised bed and beehive garden. So we've got our beds filled and we've got the soil for the back bed already done. And I wanted to show you a little bit about the composting technique that I do in the bottom of a raised bed, which helps conserve on how much soil you actually need to put in it. It also provides a feeding system as it starts to compost. So I start with layering the bottom of the beds with some larger size tree limbs that I take down when I'm pruning trees and stuff. And if I know I'm going to make a raised bed, I'll usually save them, let them dry out. I line the bottom of the bed with larger pieces like this. Those are going to eventually decompose. And then I layer on top of that layers of brown and green material. The brown is what's dried and the green is what's fresh that's cut in there. And it just creates a natural mulching system, much like you would in a compost pile, underneath the dirt to help feed the soil for growing strong plants. I just make sure that I have this evenly spaced out before I put the dirt in. And as I put the dirt in, this is just going to compact down under the weight of the dirt. I'm going to continue to fill the beds with bags of professional potting mix. That is the best type of soil to use in a raised bed garden. You don't want to use something as heavy as a topsoil or a composted manure. It's just too heavy for drainage in a raised bed garden. So you want a very light, loamy mix, and this is the perfect mix for flowers and vegetables. So we're going to go ahead and start filling our bed with that. You want to be mindful to fill the back of the bed first and work out, because you don't want to be stepping on all the soil trying to get to the back of the bed. I would not normally plant a garden in the mid-afternoon in the heat of the day, but because this is also a beehive garden, you'll notice that there's not a lot of activity at our hive, and that is because the worker bees are out foraging for pollen and nectars. So the best time to work around a beehive is in the mid-afternoon when there's no activity at the hive and the bees are out. Even when you've got to get in to check the hive to make sure that the bees are reproducing and building their colony properly, you would want to get into the box in the mid-afternoon. Doing so in the evening or in cold weather, it's a very good chance that you could get stung or upset the hive. It's also very important when you are planting, you always want to make sure that your plants are hydrated. So when you get them home from a garden center, give them a really good drink of water before putting them into the dirt. All plants experience some type of shock when they get transplanted, so you want them well hydrated. And the easiest way to handle a lot of these small packs, and sometimes even these smaller containers, is fill up a plastic tub with some water and you can simply soak them in it. These have rehydrated for about 5 minutes and they perked right back up. So just set them in, cover them with water, and let them set there. And you'll know that they become hydrated when they stop floating in the water. They actually sink down. When they're dry, they float around in the water very easily. Before laying out your garden, you want to make sure that you get your irrigation in place. I am attaching to our automatic irrigation system with a drip line, which is just a flexible tubing that I can pierce different bubblers into along the way. And these give about a 3-foot span of a very light sprinkle that will go on daily with our sprinkler system. And the nice thing about this is that if you expand your container garden, you can keep tapping into that line for pots or other beds that you may want to add to it. So today I'm going to be planting a mixture of already established plants from the garden center along with seeds. And I have a variety of zinnias, dill, moonflower, peas, cosmos, Siberian wallflower, marigolds, all great flowers for a bee garden. Bees love to pollinate these flowers, as well as do butterflies. So these are great things to plant, and I've actually installed a trellis on the back of the wall here, and also in the back of the other box. And I did that for one reason. Because we have a beehive here and we will probably add to this beehive colony, the bees need about a 6-foot clearance to be able to take off and land into the hive. It's almost like an airport if you actually watch it. So they need about a 6-foot clearance where there's not a lot of height, so they could come down and get into the box in a very clear trajectory. Rather than planting tall plants, I'm going to grow stuff up the trellis to sort of cover this back wall, but to add a little bit more square footage to my planting area. Because I'm planting a mixture of already established plants and seeds, I want it to be very informal looking. Nothing's going to be grown in rows. This is supposed to look like a very natural flower garden. I am mixing herbs with some annuals and perennials, along with some vegetables. And I'm going to keep the tall things towards the back of the bed. So I've got some okra, which does really well in the south in the heat. I've got some tomato plants that will be supported by the trellis. And I've also got some pole beans, which will be really lovely when they set their vegetables, but they also flower really beautifully as well. I've got a mixture of some angelonia, some yellow daisy, some zinnias. We've got some yellow squash plants here. I also am putting in 2 Japanese boxwoods in the front of each box because I do want the boxes to look nice. So I do want it to look more like a garden than just a bed of cutting flowers. This soil is potting soil, so it's nice and loose and really easy to work through. So I actually don't have to use a spade or anything to get into the ground. I just use my hands. And when you're planting, you want to make sure that you're loosening up the soil around the roots. You don't necessarily want to break off the roots, but you want to give them a nice airy structure that they can start spreading into the soil. And you want to make sure that when you're planting, you're not covering the crown of the plant. That's how a lot of plants get diseases. So you just want to come to the crown of the plant and push down around the plant just to set it in. Not too hard. The water is really going to settle in around it, but you want to make sure that it's firmly placed. Sometimes you'll get plants that are a little bit root bound from their pot. You want to basically do the same thing. You are going to tear some of these roots to loosen them up, but you don't really want to get rid of the root structure. You just want to loosen it up. And sometimes just pushing your finger in there gently will help it. But you don't ever want to break off this because this is what's going to keep the plant growing and healthy. And the same thing when you're planting it, you only want to plant it to the crown of the plant. So loosen up enough soil around it and then hold it to where the level of the soil will be and lightly push down, get it nice and firmly placed. When you're planting tomatoes, however, you do want to bring the soil up to the lowest leaf of the tomato because it will actually create roots that will come out of here to further help stabilize the tomato plant. So when you're planting that, make sure you've got a nice loose area to put the plant into, sink it down in, and then you're going to cover it with loose soil. You don't want to compact it too hard around. Right up to the first set of leaves on the plant. When I plant my seeds, I want this to really look like a wildflower garden when it's established. So I've picked seeds for plants that were all about 1 to 2 feet tall at maturity, and I mix them all together. So these I'm just going to spread around on the top of the soil and scratch them in a little bit to give it sort of a wildflower effect. The few seeds that I am going to strategically place is a moonflower. It almost looks like a morning glory, but it blooms at night. I've got green pea seeds to grow green peas, and I've also got some sunflower seeds, and those are going to be a little bit taller. So all of those things are going to stay towards the back and the side of the planter, again, so that I'm not obstructing the flight path of the bees. And all I'm doing is just pressing the seed into the soil. The soil is really loose, so all I have to do is press it down in about half of a finger's depth, and that should be fine. The moonflower seeds and the pea seeds I did soak overnight, and that will help them germinate a little bit quicker. So I'm just going to pour these in my hand, divide them in two, kind of an equal mix between both, and lightly spread them throughout the bed of the garden. In both beds. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I don't even really have to even push those into the soil as I come out with a hose to really soak these beds. Now that everything is in here, because the soil is so light, the water's just going to compact it right down into it. I have finished our project, and I'd like to invite you in to come and see how it turned out. As you can see, we've got our beds planted, we've got our irrigation system put in, everything is ready to go. I also put down some pine needles as a base for walking around, and you can see our bees are loving it. And the very last thing that we have to do is replace our fence in the back. Thank you for joining me for another episode of At Home with Joseph. Stay tuned for our next video, and be sure to follow us on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube page at Home with Joseph, and follow me on Instagram also at Home with Joseph. Thanks so much.